of you folks here. So let me start by sharing my screen. Let's see. So I hope you folks can see this slide here. I'm trying to set up so I can see your faces or your cameras a little bit here in case there's a question or something. Okay. So let's see. I can start this. Should hopefully work. All right, wonderful. So as I was saying, thank you, Alana, for the invitation. Thank you to the the Ken network for inviting me today to speak. I'm super excited to give this presentation. Before we get started, just a quick note here. For today's presentation, we'll be using a platform called Mentimeter. So it is a very cool platform. Helps make our workshops a little bit more engaging by allowing me to ask you folks questions. So I would encourage you, if you have a phone, you can just take your camera and scan this QR code here, which will allow you to access the platform. If you're on a computer, you can just open a browser window, go to menti.com here, and just enter this little code right here. It should be allowing you to join the session. I can see already a lot of people are joining in, so looks like it's working quite well. I'll just give it a few seconds to let people join. There won't be too many questions, but just a few to get you interacting a little bit throughout the session. Make sure that you're following along. And if you have any questions, any concepts that are not super well understood, you can actually ask questions about it and things of the sort. A quick heads up for today's meeting. It'll be a lot of me talking, but I would encourage you at any time, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand here on Teams, or unmute yourself and ask your questions directly. It's totally okay, and I would be happy to talk to you throughout the session. So maybe we'll start with, just to make sure that this Mentimeter platform is working well, just a little question to help me gauge a little bit the audience here that we have today, about where you are in your career, what kind of role do you have. Already I'm seeing a lot of, quite educated folks here, people that are far along in their careers, which is great. I'm interested in this other. I didn't know exactly what else to put here, so I'm kind of curious. Anybody in this category feel like they could perhaps unmute themselves and tell me a little bit about this? Maybe Alana, you could help me understand this other category perhaps a little bit. Because it seems like that most people. Interesting. Okay. Well, good to know. It helps me, put the level here for the presentation a little bit, well, at the right level. And I'm just curious, if you have anything that you'd like specifically to get out of this session. And this would help me, basically, if you have any questions, I can try to address it during the presentation. So feel free if you have anything that you have in mind, anything specifically that you'd like to learn about, whether it's the different levels of government, maybe it's tactics and strategy to communicate to decision makers and things like that. Maybe you don't know what science policy is like, and that is totally fair, because that's not something that we really learn about in our scientific training in universities. Well, if there's nothing, then I guess we'll just get started. And if you have learn more about science policy, yes. I mean, this is great. This is exactly what we'll be talking about today. So I guess I'll just go on a little bit with the presentation. And I really love this question here that just appeared on the screen. I do feel for you. We are living through some very tough times this year. It's been quite striking. So I can definitely resonate with this. And I'll try to bring a little ray of sunshine and hope in your day today. Um, Fantastic. Well, I'm really glad to hear all of these little tidbits here. We'll try to address some of these, and hopefully by the end of the presentation, and maybe as Alana said, there will be a second session that we'll be organizing with a little bit more of a hands-on approach on how to, deliver your message and how to really bring your voice to this decision makers. Hopefully by the end, you'll be a little bit more equipped to bring in the change that you'd like to see in our world. So let's just stop it there for now. I loved all of these questions, and I'll just move on with the presentation. So, uh, as was said before, my name is Felix. I'm the interim executive director at Evidence for Democracy. It's really a pleasure to be here. I just want to start the presentation today by telling you a little bit about our organization and what we do. So we are a not-for-profit organization that is championing the integration of scientific evidence in government decision-making. So what that means is that we want our government to use more scientific data and evidence in all decisions that they do. It is not a matter of left or right or political party or anything like that. We believe that everybody gains when the decisions that are taken by our government are informed by the best available evidence. So the work that we do is kind of summarized by the schematic on the right, where we do some research work internally to try to understand, where does the information that parliamentarians and politicians in general use, where does it come from? What are the barriers to accessing scientific information? All of these. Then we do a lot of science advocacy as well. We try to make sure that science and scientific evidence as a whole is important for our decision makers. And we advocate for, strong scientific integrity policies, for example, for our federal scientists. We also advocate for transparency, open science, all of these things. So we do a lot of campaign, and hopefully our hope is that all of this builds to basically create change in the policy world to have more evidence-informed decision making. If some of you have seen a presentation from us from E4D before, you may have seen this picture here, but I want to start by asking you maybe if some of you know what this picture here is. It is a little old at this point, so it's possible that some folks were not around when this took place. I was not in university at that time, or was I? I was doing my undergrad actually, so barely getting involved in research at the time. But this was a rally that took place in the summer of 2012 in Ottawa, and it was called the Death of Evidence Rally. And you can see here the Grim Reaper walking on Wellington Street, followed by the coffin representing the evidence that would never see the light of day. At the time, Canada was governed by the Conservative government of Stephen Harper, and for many years at that point, there had been several attacks on science as a whole, a series of attacks that we now refer to as the War on Science in Canada. So this culminated really in 2012 when federal scientists, about 90% of them, felt like they could not speak freely to the media about their work. So this prompted them to organize this rally, and thousands of scientists marched on the Hill in Ottawa to protest against this muzzling of scientists and budget cuts to the federal science apparatus. Following the rally, the organizers created an organization that became known as Evidence for Democracy. So this is really where we saw our start as an organization back in 2012. And since then, we've seen a lot of wins in Canada. We now have a chief science advisor at the federal level. We've seen scientific integrity being enshrined in a lot of collective agreements for government scientists. We also now have a permanent committee, the Standing Committee on Science and Research, that studies any questions related to science and research in Canada. So we've seen a lot of wins since 2012, but in recent, well, actually this year, a lot of these wins have come under attack, following this man and his administration. Even though they are in another country, we are seeing direct attacks on this side of the border as well. But all of that to say that we've been working really hard to prevent and to limit the negative impacts that these attacks on science and interference can have in our scientific ecosystem here in Canada. One of our flagship reports was a series of reports actually called Evidence in Action, where we went and spoke with parliamentarians to understand a little bit where is the evidence that they use coming from? What are the barriers to accessing it? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. We also did an assessment of the level of transparency to see, can we know actually what evidence was used to support all kinds of decision making? We did a public poll to see what was the attitude of the Canadians towards the use of evidence by the government. And, spoiler alert, but everybody wants more transparency and more scientific evidence used by our government. We also did another big series that we called Evidence Matters, to empower the general public to ask for evidence, to understanding scientific evidence. This is another one of our flagship research projects. And ultimately, all of these actions kind of boil down to this value that we strongly believe in, which is that when we all benefit when governments make policy decisions that are informed by the best available evidence, when we answer the questions, what, who, where is it going to take effect? Why? On what time scale? All of these questions, it leads to better outcomes for all. So the outline of the presentation today, we have a little bit of theory to cover. At first, we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of science policy. What is science policy? What are the roles of scientists in this field? We're going to talk a little bit about how to engage with elected officials, but I really want to keep some time for a group discussion here at the end that I have planned to talk about a decision that took place this summer to ban people from accessing the woods and the forests in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, actually, to prevent the spread of wildfires. So I really want to have some time to do this. So I'll try to cover as much material as possible. But yes, this is a priority of mine. If at any point, again, you have questions, if something is not clear, feel free to raise your hand or interrupt me. I really don't mind at all. It would actually be great if we got to talk a little bit between us. So we're going to start here with science policy. So a little bit of a check-in. I want to ask you now on this Mentimeter app that we have been using, what is science policy? And for those of you that have joined perhaps a little later after we started the session today, you can join this very easily. You go to menti.com. If you're on a computer, you just open a browser window and you enter this code here. You can also access it on your phone, and it's going to allow you to interact with me as I ask a couple of these questions here going forward. So I want to start with this. What comes to mind when you hear science policy? Is this, what is it to you? Is it a brand new, subject? Have you heard about this before? Anything that comes to mind? Truly, there's no bad answer here. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about this. So I'm just going to pause and take a little sip of coffee and let you folks enter some keywords here in the cloud. I like this. I like the intersection and the translation a little bit. Yeah, two-way, informed. Yeah, the application of research is also a good one. It is interesting. A guide translation. I really like translation, I have to say. And this is something that, I hope to shed a little bit more lights on as we go through the presentation. But all of these are really good. Under considered. Interesting. Yes, I mean that's definitely something that historically has not been so prominent in Canada, but I think in recent years we've seen a surge really of an interest from the science community and also the policy community to engage in this dialogue between the two populations. Yeah, all of these are really, really good. And I really like that a lot of the words that you're bringing up today indicate kind of this relationship, this two-way dialogue between entities, which is exactly, I mean, that's right on the money. Um, that is exactly it. So let me stop it right there and pursue with the presentation. And I want to set the stage with the actors that we'll be talking about today, very broadly speaking. We have the government, the public, and the scientists that are going to be interacting through various mechanisms. So on one side, and I hope you know this, there's this two-way relationship between the government and the public that we call democracy, at least in Canada. On one hand, the government provides some rights, services, security to the public through policies, bills, infrastructure, healthcare, you name it. And in return, the public engages with the government through voting, but also through their taxes, feedback, and accountability. All of those are mechanisms through which these two entities interact with each other. Then we have this relationship between the public and scientists that we'll be calling, broadly speaking, science communication. On one hand, the public gives some interest to the scientists to pursue their quest for knowledge. Especially in Canada, as science is a public good, it is primarily funded through taxpayers' money. There is an interest from the public in engaging in the scientific process. And in return, scientists provide the public with knowledge and innovation that takes many different forms. Healthcare is one, AI is another one, but you can also think about poverty reduction or pollution reduction. All of those are ways to innovate and engage with the public from a scientific point of view. And then in the other corner, and this is really what science policy is about, and I think many of you have highlighted that in your words before, it's this two-way relationship between the government on one hand and scientists. And typically the two arrows here, we're going to consider them kind of separately, but for the purpose of today's talk, we're going to be considering them together. So on one hand, you have this arrow that is pointing from the government to the scientists. That is kind of the policy for science. This is all the regulation that the government provides for, what do we give funding to who, for what reason, what are the priorities that we should pursue. All of this is basically chosen by the government and passed on to the scientists, which in return provide evidence, people, and knowledge to the government. And this is really where evidence for democracy works, right? It's in this space to engage the scientific community with the government to try to inform decision making scientifically informed perspective. But there's also top talent and to combat the grand challenges of our century. So we have these three relationship. We'll be focusing primarily on this one today. So this, bi-directional relationship between the government and scientists. Now that the stage is set a little bit, we're going to be talking about the roles of scientists in this space of science policy and advocacy, just broadly speaking. To talk about this, we're going to be talking about Roger Pilker's model that is called the honest broker. This is one model to, talk about the roles of scientists in the decision-making space. There are many more of them. This one is from 2012, so we've been using since our inception, and it is still a good model to, get to start getting involved in science policy and to understand the different hats that scientists can wear when they engage in this ecosystem. So the way that Pilke talks about this, he imagines kind of four archetypical roles that scientists can take when they engage in science policy. There's two more passive ones and two more active ones. So the two more passive ones, if you want, are these on the screen. So we start with the pure scientists here. And the pure scientist is kind of the least involved role that a scientist can be in this space of engaging in science advocacy. It is someone that has no interest whatsoever in the decision-making process. They just want to share some facts. So to illustrate this a little bit better, I'm going to be using the same example that Pilke uses in his book here, which is, you are going into a new town and you're looking for a place to eat dinner tonight. So if you were to ask a pure scientist, where should I eat dinner tonight? Maybe the pure scientist, has no interest whatsoever in your activities. Maybe they would give you kind of, the Canadian food guide or something like that. And you have the ball is in your camp. You have all the information needed to make the decision on your own about what would be a good meal for you. So, obviously, this role basically doesn't exist in reality because as soon as you are somewhat involved in the decision-making process, you're no longer a pure scientist. But still, it's important to kind of put it out there and to know that that's kind of on one extreme, that's one role that scientists can take. Then the next step up in terms of involvement is what he calls the science arbiter. So the science arbiter is, they act as a resource for decision makers. So they are ready to answer questions when needed. And really the important part of the sentence here is the when needed part. So they don't actively engage in the decision-making process. They don't give recommendations, but when they are asked, they answer the question. So the equivalent in our example for the dinner would be, imagine a hotel concierge. It's someone that you would go to and you ask, I want to go out tonight. And then they could ask you, okay, what kind of food do you like? Oh, I'd like a good burger. Oh, well, there's this pub down the street. You can go there. It's someone that like that would, asks a couple of questions and acts as a resources for decision makers, but they don't give their recommendation. They wouldn't tell you, you should go there or you should go there. So those are the more kind of passive roles. And as we move into the more active roles, that's where it starts to be a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. So we have the issue advocate. Now, that person, they work to try to convince a decision maker to make a specific choice. So they tell a decision maker essentially what they ought to do, what they should do, and they reduce the scope of choice. So that's really the important part here is the reduction in the scope of choice. To go back to our example for the dinner, this is someone that would tell you, there's this incredible Italian restaurant. It's the best in town. They have amazing pasta. You need to go there. They would reduce, they don't really care about what your opinions of what food do you like, but they will tell you what you should do, what they believe you should do. And so this is, it's a caricature, obviously, but I think you get a sense of what this person basically is in the scientific advocacy space, is really reducing the scope of choice and telling the person what they believe they should do. And lastly, the person, and maybe the name of the book kind of hints at, the role that PLK advocates that scientists should take in this space, is what he calls the honest broker of policy alternatives. Well, it's a mouthful, but it's basically someone that provides a broad array of information to let the decision maker reduce the scope of choice on their end. So it's someone you can be, pretty exhaustive or limited in your approach here, but it's someone that would say basically, I would, if you care about so and so, there's option A, which would provide, this consequence. If you care more about this other factor, then perhaps you can go with option B, which has these advantages and so on and so on. So this is someone that would provide you with increase your scope of choice instead of reducing it like the issue advocate would do, and provides kind of a rationale and different reasons why options A or B or C and so on would be preferred by the decision maker. And this is typically the role that science advisors in our government try to take, from Dr. Mona Niemer, Canada's chief science advisor, or Rémi Quirion, Quebec's chief scientist. Both of them have told me that this is really the position that they try to advocate for. The reason for that is because um, the issue advocate, the one thing that people need to think about when they interact in this space is that you can be a stealth issue advocate. So this is basically someone that uses, a breadth of information and scientific evidence to advocate for a particular course of action. And they don't necessarily realize that they are being an issue advocate. They are advocating for a particular course of action. It is important when, as scientists in this field, to recognize that there are very few circumstances where evidence and data alone suggests a particular course of action or something to do whenever you measure something. And perhaps this is contentious, but it is very rare that data alone suggests what to do, and this is where politics come in, because we have different values, different priorities, and there's a ton of different reasons why we should take this or that decision. So something to really be mindful of as scientists when we involve in this space is that there's a million reasons why decision makers choose this or that rather than this other decision here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But this is just kind of a quick word of warning here to set the stage and to put these little categories clearly. So this is kind of a mouthful and a lot of theory. So I just want to take a moment actually to check in with you folks and to make sure to ask you this question. Which one of these roles do you think you identify with the most in your current work? Are you more, a pure scientist that don't engage in the policymaking process? Are you, generally speaking, an honest broker and you try to provide a breadth of options? Are you kind of advocating for a specific course of action? All of these are, good answers. There's no wrong answers. And as a matter of fact, these categories, they're not fixed. They're not, you know, you can wear different hats depending on the context, and that's totally okay. And it's recognizing, what the context is and what role you should take in this context. I think that's the important thing to learn as scientists engaging in science policy. So this is really interesting to see. I'm glad that there's a lot of honest brokers among us today. This is good. And issue advocate is also great. I really think that scientists have a strong role to play in advocacy in general and to engage in issue advocacy. That's totally okay. But it's important to recognize when we are doing so. So I'm glad to see this. This is about what I would expect, and interesting also that there are no pure scientists among us, which I guess makes sense in a knowledge mobilization kind of crowd. So let me move on with the presentation because I think time is flying by, and I want to make sure that I have enough time for a group discussion with you folks today. So just a couple of points for personal reflections before taking part in advocacy. It's important to recognize that everybody have biases and personal beliefs, and these can play a role in shaping how a message is delivered and also perceived. It's important to recognize the context. You can wear different roles, as I was saying, in different scenarios, and that's okay. But you should be mindful of being a stealth issue advocate. Even if you may not realize it yourself, by advocating for a particular course of action, you may be advocating for a particular political ideology, even if you're not fully aware of that. And that can impact the integrity of science as a whole in the science policy field. So it's important to check our own biases and make sure that we're not being a stealth issue advocate needlessly. And specifically, when we consider some scientific issues in recent years have become deeply politicized, it's important to recognize, personal biases and beliefs that people have. We can think of climate change, abortion, the COVID pandemic. There's a lot of issues that have now become deeply politicized, even though some of them, I mean, it's kind of crazy to say that should not have been. But, this is the world that we live in, and we have to adapt to the current situation. So perhaps some of you remember this dress. I certainly remember when I was in school seeing this pop up on social media. It took social media by storm. In case you don't remember, this was a picture that was shared, probably Facebook or something like that, where people disagreed about the color that they saw this dress. Some people said that they saw it blue and black. Other people said that they saw it white and gold. Uh, I definitely see it blue and black. So I don't understand when people say white and gold. But I want to do a little exercise today. It's kind of a fun exercise. And I want to ask you on Menti, what color do you see this dress? As kind of a way to illustrate that everybody has personal biases and beliefs that are tainting, what they say. And every time I do this slide, the results amaze me. Who are you people seeing this white and gold dress? I don't get it at all. It's really, it seems like there is kind of a majority here, but it could be the screen settings. And that was what the whole discussion was about on social media at the time. People completely, nobody understood exactly this little difference that people perceived. It's kind of crazy to see it still today. Yes. And as a matter of fact, yes, the screen settings do make a difference in kind of the way that we perceive the dress. And when you change the colors a little bit, you can see that it appears a little bit more white and gold or blue and black. But all of that to say that, perception is very important. And, this is a dress, obviously, this is a little joke. But this can think about this as, I don't know, the use of glyphosate and Roundup, in agriculture, for example, the difference between Europe and North America, very different in the perception. Fighting climate change, abortion, COVID pandemic, all of these are, we have to recognize the beliefs and the biases that people may have when you enter this discussion. And often science and policy, there's this kind of tension between different factors. We can think about, I think a great one to think about is the time horizon. So in science, often we have research projects that span many years, sometimes, decades. We think on the long term, whereas when it comes to policy, we have a time horizon that is very short. Sometimes we have to make decisions within the hour, within a day. And it's very hard to reconcile the timescale of science with the timescale of policy. And a salient example of that was really the COVID pandemic, as the evidence kind of evolved with time, and we were asking our government, what do we need to do, and it was, if you remember, it was really hard because a lot of people didn't know what to do. So there is that kind of tension there. There's also a tension in the language, where in science we want to be as precise as possible when we say a statement. In policy, often we are looking for flexibility in our language. The uncertainty is also, or the risk tolerance is also a very interesting factor to consider when we engage in this space. In science, I would say we're quite tolerant on uncertainty. At least we can quantify it, and within a level of uncertainty, we can make claims. But in the policy world, this is something that is quite uncomfortable, and we generally want, a definite answer. We want to know for sure that when we do this action, when we make this decision, it's going to lead to these consequences. It's very hard to do in reality, but that's what people like to do, what they aspire to. You know, different levels of transparency as well in science, very open, generally speaking. You know, we always show our sources, we always share the data, you know, and we've seen with the open science movement in recent years kind of a push towards more transparent. Whereas in the government, you know, and this comes from our own research at E4D, but we often find very closed spaces where evidence is used, mind you, it is used, but it is unclear which evidence and where it comes from. The tenure is also a very big factor where, you know, in science or in general, we have very long tenure, generally speaking, whereas in the world of politics and policy, you know, it works through cycles and we have to deal with that through elections and so on. And there's also a difference in the geography where obviously the science, you know, there's some that is done in Ottawa, obviously, but it is spread throughout the territory in Canada, whereas policy at the federal level is very centralized, it's very focused in the National Capital Region. So you have to take all of these differences into account when you engage in this field as a scientist. And this is really what we try to help with at E4D. We've created various guides to give the tools to scientists to engage in this field and to try to bridge the gap between decision makers and scientists. So we have several guides that are available. You know, they're there. Alana, I would be happy to share the slides after if, you know, you want to circulate it with the crowd here so you can have access to these guides. Otherwise, they are always available on our website for free. So please use them. We really want you folks to have the tools to engage with decision makers. So, you know, before time is flying, I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you. I want to ask you, generally speaking, why you think scientists should engage in advocacy. Now that we've talked a little bit about the different roles and what the field is, I want to ask you why you think scientists should engage in this space. Is there something kind of particular about, you know, their career, who they are, what they do, that gives them a special role in the policymaking space? Um, you know, again, there's not really bad answers here. I would really be curious to hear your thoughts about this. They are knowledgeable holders. That is absolutely true. But something I have to mention about this is that they're very usually specialized. And that is some tension that we see often in policymakers that are trying to, you know, generalize generally speaking, right? They want to have something that works in many different cases, where sometimes in research we are very specialized in a niche field. So that's just something to keep in mind, but that is absolutely true. Um, I absolutely agree with everything that is here. I love help combat misinformation. I really love that, and especially nowadays, there's so much misinformation. We need scientists to get involved in this. I 100% agree. We need people knowledgeable in various subject areas, providing information to decision makers. Yes, to improve the lives. You know, we have the same same value at E4D, so I love to see this. To ensure sustainable forest management, yes, absolutely. Um, Sharing what they know makes a lot of sense, but our policy experts, their subject matter expertise, amount of humility that is important. Absolutely, absolutely. I love all of those tidbits here between perception and reality, which is good for decision making. That is a very interesting point here that you're making, whoever made this. Absolutely. Uh, you know, usually we're very good at quantifying something, right? Measuring the impact and holding ourselves accountable. So transferring all of this to the policymaking world is, you know, a great benefit for everybody. So I really love all of your answers here. I'm just going to move on because I have a series of questions of the same kind to ask you. So, you know, I don't want to spend too much time here, but all of this is really great. Increasing public appetite for evidence is also important. Solving grand challenges, we spoke about this. Forest management is one of them, but AI, housing crisis, healthcare, climate change, all of this is super important. And we also spoke about this to illustrate the realities of a particular challenge by, quantifying and making sure that we have the right parameters to measure the impact and the consequences of a decision. So now we're going to move on to, with this in mind, now that we've talked about the different roles of scientists, we've talked about why scientists in general should engage in advocacy. I want to ask you another question. Why should you specifically engage in advocacy, or why should you engage with your elected officials? And you can think about this question both as a scientist yourself, but also as a citizen, because we have different roles and different hats that we can wear and use that, leverage it for effective communication with elected officials. Remember that these people are elected to serve us, to help us, and to improve our lives. So it's important that they engage with the community. Talking about duty and desire to do good, I can relate to this. That seeing the consequences, impacts of decisions. I totally share your sentiments here. Um, it represents us in decision making. Absolutely, absolutely. They need to know our thoughts, values, and this is super interesting because it is their job, right? It is their duty. They often have party requirements to listen to us and to engage with us to hear our thoughts about the decisions that are being taken. So absolutely. Um, Keep them accountable is another very good one. I love this accountability piece. You are 100% correct. These elected officials, as I said, work for us, and it's our duty, in a sense, to hold them accountable to our own standards. And I like this question also. What is the difference between engaging as a scientist and a citizen? The line I think is not solid between the two. And sometimes there's actually kind of it reinforces, there's a positive feedback between the two. If you're both a citizen and, have an expertise in a topic that your MP, for example, or your MP MLA is interested in, you can use both of these expertise if you want to really deliver your message with more impact. So, you know, it can be it can reinforce each other quite well. And I really love all of your answers here. Um, but again, everything was good. I really like, there's no wrong answers. Those are all good. Getting important issues on the table, help representatives understand the impact that science has on the lives of people living in Canada. That is also good. And also from your point of view, I think it's important to learn what your representatives stand for. Doing this exercise of putting yourself in their shoe as a decision maker is extremely useful for us as scientists evolving in this field. And we'll touch a little bit about this just in a few minutes. But actually, right now, also, why do you think your elected representative would want to hear from you? So, put yourself in their shoes. What do they gain to learn from you? I think this exercise is very important to learn how to shape and deliver your message to them. Maybe they care about some things that, us, we, give perhaps a little less value to. Um, how they can benefit electorally from a policy. It's a shame to say it, but it is the reality. And often we have to frame our message within a context that makes sense for the elected officials so that this becomes kind of a two-way relationship and a win-win scenario. Um, they often don't. To some extent, that is true, but to others, it is not always true also. There are cases where they don't listen to their representatives, but they really, it depends. It really depends. Um, And generally speaking, maybe I can speak briefly about this, but at Evidence for Democracy, we advocate for evidence-informed decision making because we recognize that not everything can be just purely based on scientific evidence. You have to consider kind of many different perspectives and points of view when you make a decision. I just want to take a second to read these other answers here because I feel like this is generating a lot of passionate statements from you folks. That is true. That this one here is true. I like this statement here in the bottom left. I think this is true. This relates to what I was just saying, that evidence is one factor that goes into the decision-making process. But you have a strong voice, and your expertise actually matters a lot. Scientific expertise, having a PhD or graduate level, being a professor, an expert in something carries a lot of weight. And it is difficult. And there's this tension also in our democratic process to find a balance between listening to the general public and listening to a few experts that are maybe fewer in number, but have a little bit, like a bigger knowledge about an issue. So it's not easy finding the right equilibrium there. And there's no right answer to this. But as you can see, this is all of these are very good, and you are right on the money about this. They are not an expert on everything. They want to learn from us. And you have to think about this as kind of a give and take, as a two-way relationship between us and them. Um, so because the time is flying by, I just noticed that we have about 10 minutes left for the presentation today. I'm going to kind of skip this part here. Hope that's okay. This is just covering kind of our research on what MPs thought, where does the evidence come from? What do they find as, what is research to them? What do they think is credible and relevant? I'll skip this. This was just kind of to frame a little bit the discussion that I want to have. But all of this is available on our website, and I'll share these slides with you after the presentation today, so you can always look a little bit more if you're curious about this yourself. But yes, as kind of a closing statement on this, remember that relationship is very important. You need to come at this from, you need to establish this two-way relationship. It is about confidence, after all. It is about, building a relationship and trust. On one hand, the policymakers need reliable and relevant information, and the scientists, want to convey evidence to the society. They want to engage and do good and see the impact of their research. And so we can help kind of bridge this gap and connect these two together. And ultimately, as I said, science very rarely informs policy on its own. There's a broad variety of factors that decision makers need to consider when they make a decision. And this is made even more difficult when you consider that there's a lot of different decision makers all working on the different aspects of an issue on their own corner of the world. You have different levels of government, municipal, provincial, federal. It gets pretty complicated fast. With this in mind, I want to stop talking now. I've talked a lot, and I want to hear from you a little bit. So I want to have a group discussion a little bit, moderated, about the decision to ban forest access this summer in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. This is not about being right or wrong, so please remember to be civil. I just want to have a little bit of an exercise and to put yourself in the shoes of the decision makers. What were the factors that came into this? So, you know a lot more about this than I do, but broadly speaking, some context.